July 6, 2025, KwaZulu-Natal Police Headquarters. Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi stood before the cameras, his hands trembling with rage. What he was about to say would either save South Africa or get him killed. "The syndicate has captured our police force," he declared, each word a bullet aimed at the heart of corruption. "Politicians, judges, senior officers, they're all on the payroll. And at the center of this cancer sits one man." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Vusimuzi Cat Matlala. In that moment, Mkhwanazi wasn't just exposing a criminal. He was declaring war on a shadow government that had turned law enforcement into a joke, justice into a commodity, and murder into a business expense. The whistleblower cop had just painted a target on his own back, but someone had to speak. Because in South Africa, the criminals didn't just break the law anymore, they owned it. This is the story of how a tenderpreneur became a killer, how a businessman became a kingpin, and how one woman's survival brought down an empire built on blood money and police badges. This is the hunt for the cat who thought he had 9 lives. He was wrong. Vusimuzi Matlala understood power the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Every connection, every weak point, every place to cut. In the new South Africa, where liberation heroes had become landlords and revolutionaries had become millionaires, he saw opportunity where others saw obstacles. Born into democracy's promise, Matlala learned early that the real currency wasn't rand or dollars. It was access. A handshake here, a donation there, a favor remembered, a debt collected. By his 40s, he'd turned influence peddling into an art form. He started small, a housebreaking charge in 2001 that should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it became his education. Prison didn't reform him, it networked him. Behind bars, he met men who understood that real crime happened in boardrooms, not back alleys. They taught him that the biggest scores came with government letterheads, that the safest robberies happened in tender meetings, that the best criminals wore suits and carried business cards. By the time he emerged, Matlala had a plan. Why break into houses when you could break into the treasury? Why steal from individuals when you could steal from the state? All you needed were the right connections, the right paperwork, and the right amount of shamelessness. His companies were phantoms: Medicare 24, Tshwane, Cat VIP protection, shells within shells, each one a funnel for state money. On paper, they provided services. In reality, they provided cover. When auditors came knocking, they found nothing but smoke and mirrors. When investigators got close, they found themselves transferred, suspended, or silenced. Take Medicare 24, Tshwane. This company, with no medical infrastructure, no qualified staff, no track record of healthcare delivery, somehow won contracts worth hundreds of millions. How? Because in Matlala's world, competence was optional when you had connections. Workers would show up to empty offices, wondering where the medical equipment was. Subcontractors would deliver supplies to addresses that didn't exist. Invoices would be paid for services never rendered. And when people complained, when workers demanded their wages, Matlala was already on to the next tender, the next scam, the next score. He lived like a king while his employees starved. Rolls-Royces in the garage while workers took taxis they couldn't afford. Mansions in Johannesburg while the communities his companies were supposed to serve crumbled. Designer suits that cost more than most South Africans made in a year. Even cosmetic surgeries. Because when you're stealing millions, why not steal a new face too? The lifestyle wasn't just about luxury, it was about power. Every expensive car was a middle finger to the system. Every mansion was a monument to his untouchability. Every designer label was a declaration that crime, done right, pays better than honesty ever could. The murder of Babita Deokaran should have been the beginning of the end. The Tembisa Hospital CFO had discovered the truth about the R3 billion fraud, the phantom payments, the tenders that went to companies that existed only on paper. She'd done what whistleblowers do, she'd blown the whistle. But Deokaran didn't understand the rules of Matlala's game. In his world, whistles were silenced with bullets. August 2021. The gunmen waited outside her home, patient as death itself. They knew her routine, knew her car, knew that she always parked in the same spot. When Deokaran's car pulled up, they struck with military precision. 7 bullets, point-blank range. She died trying to save a system that couldn't save her. The killing was professional, clinical, and carried a message written in blood. interfere with our business, and you'll be out of business permanently. The message rippled through government corridors like poison. Clerks who'd been gathering evidence suddenly developed amnesia. Officials who'd been asking questions suddenly found other interests. The investigation that should have followed Deokaran's murder instead followed her to the grave. But Deokaran's death had an unintended consequence. It turned a spotlight on the very shadows where Matlala operated. And in those shadows, investigators found his fingerprints everywhere. Dozens of suspicious tenders linked to his network. Inflated invoices that would make a cartel boss blush. Services paid for but never delivered. It was organized crime dressed in corporate clothing, and Matlala was its tailor. The Tembisa hospital scandal revealed the anatomy of tender fraud in devastating detail. Emergency medical supplies purchased at 1,000% markup. Cleaning services billed for hospitals that were never cleaned. Security contracts for guards who existed only on paper. Each tender a theft, each contract a crime, each invoice an insult to taxpayers who believed their money went to healing the sick. But the investigation, like so many before it, began to stall. Witnesses became reluctant. Documents went missing. The lead investigator was suddenly promoted to a desk job in another province. It seemed like Matlala's magic would work again, that another scandal would be swept under the rug of South African amnesia. In 2024, Matlala achieved the impossible. His company won a R360 million contract to provide health services to the South African Police Service. Let that sink in. The force meant to arrest him was now paying him. It was like hiring a wolf to guard sheep, then acting surprised when the flock disappeared. The tender process was a masterclass in corruption. Requirements were tailored to exclude legitimate companies. Evaluation criteria were adjusted to favor Matlala's bid. Competing proposals mysteriously disappeared. By the time the contract was awarded, it wasn't a tender, it was a coronation. Days before the tender was awarded, former Police Minister Bheki Cele had been Matlala's house guest, enjoying the view from his luxury penthouse. The same penthouse purchased with proceeds from previous tenders. The same view that looked out over a city Matlala was systematically looting. Cele would later claim it was a coincidence, that he'd stayed there before leaving office, that there was no connection to the tender. In South Africa, coincidences came with price tags, and this one cost R360 million. The SAPS contract was so obviously corrupt that even hardened cynics were shocked. 0 qualifications, no infrastructure, no track record except for leaving unpaid workers and unfinished projects. But when you own the people making decisions, merit becomes meaningless. Within months, the cracks showed. Police officers complained about non-existent medical services. Invoices piled up for treatments never given. The few legitimate medical professionals hired by Medicare 24 quit in disgust, unwilling to be part of the charade. One doctor later testified that he'd been hired to provide cover, to make it look like real medical services were being delivered. "I saw one patient in 3 months," he said, "but they billed for thousands." National Police Commissioner Fanny Masemola eventually canceled the contract, citing procurement irregularities. But millions had already been paid out. Matlala had shown that with enough money you could buy anything, even the people meant to arrest you. What Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi revealed on that July morning went beyond simple bribery. This was systematic capture, a hostile takeover of law enforcement by organized crime. According to Mkhwanazi, Matlala had turned police units into his private security force. Elite task teams investigating political killings would suddenly find their funding cut. The best detectives in the country, men and women who'd spent years building cases against the syndicate, would arrive at work to find transfer orders to rural stations. Over 120 case dockets compromised, Mkhwanazi revealed, his voice heavy with disgust. Disappeared from evidence rooms, destroyed in mysterious fires, lost in bureaucratic black holes. Each docket represented lives lost, crimes unpunished, justice denied, murder cases reduced to ash, fraud investigations vanishing like morning mist, years of painstaking police work undone by a phone call from the right person to the right contact. The money trail was staggering. Gala dinners where politicians ate 5-star meals while democracy starved. Tables at R50,000 a seat, paid for by Matlala, attended by the very people supposed to oversee police integrity. International trips for police officials who returned with full pockets and empty promises. First-class flights to Dubai, 5-star hotels in Paris, all expenses paid by a man they should have been investigating. Crime intelligence officers like Colonel Smanga Simelane had become regular guests at Matlala's events. They attended political rallies on his dime, rubbed shoulders with ministers at his parties, and in return made sure certain investigations never saw the light of day. Even judges, Mkhwanazi claimed, had been compromised. The very people sworn to deliver justice had sold it to the highest bidder. In Matlala's world, verdicts were negotiable, and innocence or guilt depended on your bank balance. They dismantled our political task team, Mkhwanazi revealed, naming names that made journalists gasp. The unit investigating political assassinations disbanded overnight, the officers scattered, the cases buried, all because Matlala made a phone call and wrote a check. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu and Deputy Commissioner Shadrack Sibiya stood accused of taking Matlala's money, of dismantling investigations that got too close, of turning the South African Police Service into the South African Protection Service. Protection for criminals, that is. Mchunu denied everything, his denials as hollow as Matlala's companies. "I have never taken a cent from any criminal," he said, even as evidence mounted that he'd attended events funded by Matlala, that his travel had been paid for by the very man he was supposed to investigate. Sibiya stayed silent, his silence more damning than any confession. But in a system where denials were currency and silence was golden, their words meant nothing. The evidence spoke louder. CAT VIP Protection, Matlala's security company, was perhaps his most audacious front. Licensed to possess military-grade weapons for executive protection, it had become an arms depot for organized crime. 40 AK-47 assault rifles, enough to equip a small army. Registered legally to CAT VIP but turning up at crime scenes across the country. When police raided celebrity Sean Mkize's Durban mansion on tax charges, they found the weapons cache. The serial numbers traced back to Matlala's company. The implications were terrifying. A private security firm with access to automatic weapons, run by a man with no qualms about murder. How many hits had been carried out with these guns? How many witnesses silenced? How many rivals eliminated? Matlala would later claim the weapons were for legitimate security work, that they'd been stored at the mansion temporarily. But legitimate security didn't require enough firepower to storm a police station. This wasn't protection, it was an arsenal for war. Every empire has a weakness. For Julius Caesar, it was Brutus. For Al Capone, it was tax evasion. For Vusimuzi Matlala, it was Tebogo Thobejane. The actress had been more than just arm candy at charity galas. She'd been inside the inner circle, had seen where the bodies were buried, metaphorically and perhaps literally. She knew which politicians took money, which cops looked away, which judges could be bought. She'd sat in meetings where murders were planned, where police raids were discussed before they happened, where the price of justice was negotiated like a business deal. When their relationship ended, she became a problem that needed solving. Some say she was planning to talk, to expose the whole rotten system. Others claim she was writing a tell-all book. Whatever the truth, Matlala decided she knew too much. October 2023. Sandton's glittering streets turned into a war zone. The hitmen had done their homework. They knew Thobejane's routine, knew she always stopped at that particular traffic light, knew her car, knew she'd be vulnerable. The weapons were military grade, probably from Matlala's own arsenal. The approach was professional, 2 men, moving fast, no hesitation. The automatic weapons barked death, glass shattered, blood-painted leather seats. Thobejane's screams mixed with the sound of gunfire. But somehow, miraculously, Thobejane survived, shot multiple times, bleeding, traumatized, but alive. Her passengers weren't all so lucky. Blood and broken glass, the calling cards of Matlala's justice. But Thobejane lived to tell the tale, and what a tale it would be. The hit had failed, but it would become Matlala's biggest mistake. Because this time, the investigation wouldn't disappear. This time, the detectives couldn't be bought. This time, the evidence was overwhelming. WhatsApp messages recovered from the hitmen's phones revealed the cold-blooded nature of the plot. "Shoot her in the face," Matlala had written, "so that her family does not recognize her." The messages were detailed, specific, monstrous. Instructions on where to wait, when to strike, how to ensure she was dead. This wasn't just murder. It was murder with malice, murder with cruelty, murder designed to send a message to anyone else who might think of crossing Vusimuzi Matlala. These weren't the words of a businessman protecting his interests. These were the words of a monster who'd forgotten he was human. May 29, 2025. Dawn hadn't broken when police surrounded Matlala's mansion. The tactical units were from outside Johannesburg, officers who couldn't be bought, led by commanders who still believed in justice. The raid had been planned in secret, the officers chosen carefully. The man who'd bought cops like coffee was about to learn that not everyone had a price. The raid was textbook. Flashbang grenades shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Officers streamed through doors and windows. Matlala, caught in his silk pajamas, could only watch as his empire crumbled in real time. The search uncovered an Aladdin's cave of criminal evidence, an arsenal of illegal weapons, pistols, rifles, enough ammunition to fight a small war. Luxury items bought with blood money, a R200,000 Rolex that had probably cost someone's life, designer clothes that workers had paid for with unpaid wages, jewelry that sparkled with the tears of victims, documents linking Matlala to a web of shell companies, each one a thread in the tapestry of his criminal empire. Bank statements showing millions flowing through accounts like water through a sieve. But the physical evidence was nothing compared to the digital trail. Those WhatsApp messages, preserved in the cloud like a confession written in pixels, would become the nails in Matlala's coffin. They arrested him for attempted murder, conspiracy to murder, fraud, defeating the ends of justice, illegal possession of firearms. The charge sheet read like a criminal encyclopedia. His wife Tsakani, who'd flaunted their criminal wealth on Instagram, found herself in handcuffs too. Those blue light convoy videos she'd posted thinking she was untouchable, they became evidence of conspiracy, proof that she knew exactly where the money came from. Even behind bars, Matlala couldn't stop. Like an addict who couldn't quit, he needed the action, needed the control, needed to pull strings even from a cage. Prison guards at Kagosi Mampuru Correctional Center found the phone during a surprise raid in July, hidden in his cell, still warm from use. Call logs showed he'd been in contact with associates on the outside. Text messages revealed he was still trying to run his empire, still trying to intimidate witnesses, still trying to buy his way out of justice. They moved him to C-Max, the highest security wing. No more phones, no more privileges, no more pretending he was anything but what he was, a crime boss who'd finally run out of lives. But the real shock came from what his arrest revealed about South Africa itself. This wasn't just one man's crime story. This was a nation's tragedy, written in tender documents and death certificates. Every contract Matlala stole represented hospitals unbuilt, schools unfunded, communities abandoned. Every bribe he paid weakened the very foundations of democracy. The tenderpreneurs like Matlala had discovered that in post-apartheid South Africa, the fastest way to wealth wasn't innovation or hard work. It was connections and corruption. They'd taken a liberation movement's promise of a better life for all and turned it into a better life for themselves. What made it worse was how normal it had become. Matlala wasn't an aberration. He was a symptom of a system where saying the right things mattered more than doing the right things, where political connections trumped competence, where stealing was just business. The international crime syndicates Mkhwanazi mentioned, the drug networks operating through ports and customs, suggested something even darker. South Africa wasn't just dealing with local corruption. It had become a hub for transnational organized crime, with people like Matlala as the local franchisees. Vusimuzi Cat Matlala awaits trial at Kagosi Mampuru prison. July 11, 2025, he'll face the music in court. The hitmen he hired sing like canaries, their testimonies painting a picture of a man who turned murder into a management strategy. His wife faces her own reckoning. The lifestyle she flaunted, the blue light convoys, the luxury estates, the designer everything, all paid for with blood and stolen dreams. Every Instagram post is now evidence. Every brag is now a confession. Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi lives under 24-hour protection now. Speaking truth to power in South Africa can be fatal. The petition for increased protection for police whistleblowers grows daily, signed by citizens who understand that without people like him, the criminals win. The workers Matlala never paid still wait for their wages. The families of those killed in the crossfire still mourn. The taxpayers who funded his lifestyle still struggle. And somewhere in South Africa, the next Vusimuzi Matlala is taking notes, learning not to avoid crime but to buy better protection. The cat is caged, but the rats still run free. The syndicate Mkhwanazi exposed has tentacles reaching into every institution meant to protect citizens. Cutting off one head might not kill the beast. Yet there's hope in the courage of people like Mkhwanazi who risk everything to speak truth. Hope in investigators who can't be bought. Hope in prosecutors who remember their oath. hope in citizens who refuse to accept that this is just how things are. Vusimuzi cat Matlala thought he had 9 lives. He thought money could buy immortality, that power could purchase impunity. He thought wrong. The cat's final life is being spent in a cage, counting days until judgment. The empire he built with bullets and bribes is rubble. The people he bought are selling their stories to save themselves. This is how it ends. Not with a shootout or an escape, but with a man in a cell, stripped of power, facing the consequences of choices that turned him from businessman to killer. But this is also how it begins. With whistleblowers finding courage, with police remembering their duty, with citizens demanding better, with a country deciding that enough is enough. The hunt for the cat is over. The hunt for justice has just begun.